Glenn Raymond Tipton's name conjures images of scorching leads, booming riffs, and heavy metal. He also possesses one of the most brilliant minds in the industry. For over 40 years, his band, Judas Priest, used music as a tool, and each riff they performed had the power to rock an entire generation. But the greats are always put to the test by fate. Glenn Tipton had to fight the most significant struggle of his life as Judas Priest continued to take over the globe. He was battling Parkinson's illness, a silent foe that was gradually robbing him of his musical abilities. There were no boisterous crowds or stage lights. From a blues-loving youngster in Blackheath to a hero of heavy metal, he did it all, from songs like Painkiller and Breaking the Law to the moment he had to exit the stage. The tale of Glenn Tipton is replete with tragedy, victory, and an unwavering spirit. What was the beginning of Glenn Tipton's life? Before he encountered his greatest foe and before he became the guy who molded Judas Priest. Let's go back to the early days of the creation of the heavy metal hero. Childhood. Before becoming one of the greatest heavy metal musicians of all time, Glenn Raymond Tipton was just a typical youngster growing up in Blackheath, Staffordshire, England. Nobody could have predicted that this quiet child would become the leader of Judas Priest and change the course of rock music. On October 25th, 1947, Glenn Raymond Tipton was born in Blackheath, Staffordshire, England. He was raised in a musically inclined household. Glenn would go on to become a well-known heavy metal performer, but he had little interest in such extreme music as a child. The first sounds he heard were his mother playing the piano and gentle classical music, not screaming electric guitars or riffs. Glenn's musical preferences were greatly influenced by her mother, who was also a musician. She frequently played at home. Glenn can learn about music theory at a much younger age than other children since he is surrounded by sensitive sounds. He was not a particularly gregarious or active child. He was silent and self-absorbed. He found solace in music, which made it easy for him to express his emotions. With the assistance of his mother, Glenn began learning how to play the piano. He picked up the piano fast and naturally, but despite his skill, he never showed any interest in it. Even while he appreciated its beauty, he sensed that something was lacking. He needed a powerful energy and a sense of freedom that the piano keys simply could not provide. Things began to change when his brother Gary Tipton brought an electric guitar home. Glenn was captivated by the unadulterated electric sound as soon as he touched the strings, something the piano had never done before. Unlike many guitar geniuses, Glenn did not immediately learn his first sound from Gary. Before he could play the guitar correctly, he spent months struggling with the fingerboard in each note. Glenn persisted, though. He continued to be tenacious and motivated, qualities that would eventually characterize his style of play, depending on precision, feeling, and flow rather than just speed. When growing up in the heyday of rock and roll, when acts like the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, and the Who ruled the airwaves were popular, but instead developed a deep affection for the blues. Listening to and performing with performers like Eric Clapton, Jimi Hendrix, and Fleetwood Mac's Peter Green for hours on end, putting the feeling in each note ahead of sophisticated methods. His entire existence gradually became reliant on music. I love it so much that it's more than simply a pastime. Glenn worked as a machinist before deciding to pursue music full-time, a job that needed a great deal of patience and caution. Despite his best efforts, he was unable to escape his music. He trained, played at local bars, and looked for methods to turn his pastime into a career whenever he had free time. The teenage blues enthusiast life would be dramatically altered when fate brought him into contact with heavy metal. Novices in their professions, Glenn Tipton realized that music was more than simply a hobby as he fell in love with the guitar. It was his destiny. However, becoming a heavy metal superstar wasn't simple. Glenn had to put in years of hard work to experiment with many styles and hone the guitar talents that would eventually define an entire generation before he became the musical mastermind behind Judas Priest. Early in the 1970s, the Flying Hat Band was a hard rock group that drew inspiration from Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple. Glenn Tipton began his professional career here. Glenn's stage persona, guitar skills, and understanding of the music industry were all greatly influenced by these years. Glenn would eventually contribute the band's extensive use of intricate riffs and lengthy solos to Judas Priest. One of the greatest rock bands of the era, Deep Purple, had the Flying Hat Band as their opening act. Through this, Glenn was able to study from guitar legends like Ritchie Blackmore because to his innate talent and unrelenting commitment. However, despite having a lot of potential, the Flying Hat Band never became popular. They dissolved up before releasing any records after failing to land a major record deal. An artist's dream might have ended if they had failed too soon. When a smaller door closed, the larger one opened, but Glenn Tipton was not easily deterred. Although Judas Priest was preparing to record its debut album, Rock'n'Rolla, in 1974, they were still unsure about their musical style. The band didn't have a distinct sound at the moment, although they were influenced by progressive and blues rock. To strengthen their sound, they required a second guitarist, and Glenn Tipton arrived at the ideal moment. As soon as he joined, Glenn contributed a fresh perspective, more incisive melodies, innovative songwriting techniques, and exceptional talent. Perhaps the most significant addition he made, though, was his close bond with KK. For Judas Priest, Downing is a fantastic fit. Downing preferred to play in a raw, irate, and wild manner, whereas Tipton played with melodic correctness, depth, and structure. Using a combination that had never been employed before, they soon established themselves as one of the greatest heavy metal guitar duo ever. Despite Rock'n'Rolla's poor box office performance, the band had at last discovered the sound they were looking for. Judas Priest was now at the most crucial stage of their journey, one that would permanently alter the landscape of heavy metal. But before they could conquer the world, they still had a long way to go. Glenn Tipton's famed and prosperous career was just getting started when he joined the band that would define his whole career. When Glenn Tipton joined Judas Priest in 1974, he was more than just a new member. He was the catalyst that transformed the band's sound and helped establish them as one of the most enduring heavy metal icons. In the past, Judas Priest performed blues rock and progressive rock. However, the band entered a new phase with razor-sharp riffs, powerful songs, and a strong attitude when Tipton joined. Tipton's first major project with Judas Priest was the 1976 album Sad Wings of Destiny. With its darker, more powerful, and more poignant songs, it was a significant improvement over Rock'n'Rolla. Tipton played a significant role in both songwriting and guitar playing, particularly on songs like Victim of Changes and The Ripper. His style of play was positively received by KK. Downing played with the perfect balance of technical precision and unbridled aggression. This would turn become a Judas Priest trademark. This synergy developed further when Judas Priest transitioned from a hard rock band to a full-fledged heavy metal force with Stained Class in 1978 and Hellbent for Leather in 1979. There was still a lot of blues and rock music at the time. However, the first group to produce a sound that was sharper, more ferocious, and cleaner was Judas Priest. Songs such as Exciter played a significant role in the growth of speed metal. At this stage, Tipton was not only a fantastic guitarist, but also a talented lyricist who significantly influenced the band's course. The 1980 album British Steel, which established Judas Priest as the most influential heavy metal band globally, was the most significant turning point. In addition to reaching the top of the charts, songs like Living After Midnight and Breaking the Law altered perceptions of heavy metal. Motorcycles, stud-studded leather jackets, and a wild yet stylish attitude. In addition to demonstrating his technical guitar prowess, Tipton was a brilliant composer who created straightforward yet memorable tunes that helped Judas Priest become well-known worldwide. The primary force behind Judas Priest's success in the 1980s was Glenn Tipton. From Screaming for Vengeance in 1982 to Electric to You've Got Another Thing coming to Defenders of the Faith in 1984. Each record pushed the boundaries of what was conceivable while maintaining the heavy metal sound. Tipton continued honing his guitar technique, speed, precision, and feeling throughout this time, creating some of the most well-known solos in metal history. However, success wasn't without its challenges. In 1990, Judas Priest was the subject of an unusual case. The band was sued by the families of Raymond Belknap and James Vance, two teenagers who attempted suicide after listening to Stained Class in 1978. Families claimed that You Better Than Me's song Better included suicide-promoting lyrics. Tipton and the band had to defend themselves against unfounded accusations throughout the trial, which lasted several months. Tipton famously responded to the allegations by saying, "In the end, Judas Priest were found not guilty, but the lawsuit left an unsightly stain on their career." Judas Priest's 1990 album, Painkiller, elevated them to a whole new level after they moved past the controversy. The fastest and most dramatic parts of this record featured solos and riffs that lit up every stage. Although Tipton's previous work featured melodic and bluesy aspects, Painkiller was a complete explosion of fast-paced riffing, tapping, and shredding. Additionally, the album introduced Judas Priest to the budding metal scene. It particularly impacted guitarists like Panta, Zakk Wylde, Dimebag Darrell, and Sinister Gates. But a major surprise occurred just when Judas Priest was at their peak. In 1992, Rob Halford left the band for personal reasons. Judas Priest found this difficult, and conflicts began to emerge among the group. Glenn Tipton and KK from 1990 to 1999, with Tim Ripper Owens replacing Halford. Downing struggled to keep the band cohesive. Despite their best efforts, Judas Priest was unable to restore their former splendor, and Tipton and Downing's relationship deteriorated. Tipton had too much control over the band, according to KK, Downing's public remarks. Judas Priest Downing's autobiography of Heavy-Duty Days and Nights suggested that Tipton had more influence on band selections than Rob Halford or the management. When Halford returned in 2003, the band appeared to be back on track. However, the altercation between Downing and Tipton never entirely recovered. With songs like Judas Rising, which demonstrated that Judas Priest was still very potent, Tipton continued to push the boundaries of his originality, even though he was already well known. Nostradamus 2008, a grandiose concept album, demonstrated that his passion for heavy metal remained constant as he grew older. When KK Downing announced his departure from Judas Priest in 2011, he accused Tipton and the band's managers of creating a hazardous work environment. Although Glenn Tipton never publicly discussed these allegations, Downing's final split from Judas Priest was an obvious indication that the band had changed. Glenn Tipton dedicated his entire life to establishing Judas Priest as a well-known metal band. But the question remained as his body began to fail him. When his physical prowess failed to match his unflinching attitude, could he still continue? Parkinson's illness. There was another war going on inside Glenn Tipton's own body. As the band entered a new phase with 2014's Redeemer of Souls, Judas Priest continued to tear through the heavy metal world, but Glenn remained as dedicated as ever, writing songs, playing guitar, and giving it his all on stage. But something didn't feel quite right. His once smooth hands began to tremble. His fingers would occasionally become rigid, and he would experience mild twitches that gradually grew greater. Although Glenn was aware that this was a serious issue, he assured himself that he could manage it. But his body didn't desire that. When Judas Priest began recording Firepower in 2018, the symptoms were much more dire. Ribs used to be easy, but now they require a lot of effort. The guitar no longer seemed like an extension of who he was, unlike the last 40 years. The most dreaded reality was confirmed after numerous medical examinations. He had Parkinson's disease. This was a pretty painful realization for a musician who had spent his entire life performing on stages. Glenn, regrettably, kept it a secret. He persisted in finishing his portions by force, contributing to a record that demonstrated the values of Judas Priest: vigor, resolve, and strength. It was the toughest thing Glenn Tipton had ever done in his career, but he knew he had to quit as the band prepared for their global tour. Glenn's choice to give up acting involved more than just leaving his job. It meant giving up the life he cherished the most. But he had never been the kind to let hardship alter his perspective. He publicly stated that he didn't want to stop the band and that Judas Priest deserved a fantastic tour. He was forced to make the difficult choice to give up live performances in favor of Andy Sneap, the director of Firepower and a talented guitarist in his own right. Even though Glenn Tipton was no longer performing full-time, he was still a vital member of Judas Priest. On some of the tour's nights, he unexpectedly appeared during the encore and sang hits like Metal Gods, Living After Midnight, and Breaking the Law. When Glenn took the stage, tens of thousands of fans would cry. They weren't watching a show, though. They were witnessing a true fighter's unwavering spirit. Glenn, however, wasn't fighting for himself. He made the decision to use his struggle to inspire hope in others. Judas Priest founded the Glenn Tipton Parkinson's Foundation, a nonprofit organization that supports research into the condition and assists those who suffer from it. Rob Halford claims that Glenn doesn't want sympathy from others. Death is the last thing he wants. All he wants is for them to survive, battle, and perform music. Thousands of fans contributed money to Glenn's charity through the Firepower Tour. In addition to being a well-known musician, Glenn Tipton taught them what it meant to be genuinely resilient in the face of adversity. In addition to his speed and skill, Glenn Tipton is one of the guitarists who will be known for his spirit. He may not be able to play as well as he once did due to Parkinson's disease, but his heavy metal fighting heart will always be there. A person with strength and determination. He is not merely an artist. Glenn Tipton will always play a significant role in Judas Priest's history, even if they continue. Reactions to the altercation with Glenn Tipton. What most appeals to you about him? Please let us know what you think below, so we can honor a true legend's life outside of music. Despite being a legendary member of Judas Priest and a fierce performer on stage, Glenn Tipton was a quiet individual who did not lead the ostentatious lifestyle that many rock stars did. Glenn never engaged in significant controversies or partied excessively. However, he was a member of one of the greatest heavy metal bands ever. Judas Priest appeared to be rebellious, but his private life was subdued and significant in its own right. Rick and Karina Tipton are the couple's 2 children from their marriage to Glenn Tipton. Even though his business forced him to travel frequently and spend a lot of time away from home, he always made an effort to stay close to his family. Glenn was never a part of any high-profile scandals or affairs. In contrast, a lot of musicians were enmeshed in the risky and untamed rock and roll lifestyle. For him, singing and family were always the most essential things. According to those who knew Glenn Tipton well, he never looked for recognition outside of his antics. Many rock performers led crazy lifestyles filled with affairs, drugs, and booze. Glenn, however, was more realistic. His music, his family, and his own hobbies took up the most of his time. He preferred peaceful moments spent with his loved ones over the commotion of the media spotlight. In order to maintain equilibrium in the fast-paced world of heavy metal, Glenn also had a strong interest in fishing and auto racing. When he wasn't on stage or in the studio, racing sports cars, or just lounging by the sea, he appreciated the quiet that few rock stars ever knew. One thing that set Glenn Tipton apart from many other heavy metal stars was his humility. Despite being among the greatest musicians of his era, he never came across as arrogant or made an effort to boast about his abilities. In most conversations, Glenn stayed away from discussing himself. Rather than focusing on his own stardom, he always acknowledged the contributions of his bandmates and concentrated on the band's overall ethos. His humility was greatly respected by both his admirers and friends. Even after he ceased performing, Glenn Tipton's music and his unflinching attitude, humility, and commitment as a musician left a lasting impression. In addition to being a heavy metal icon, he is a symbol of integrity and strength. This man was respected for more than just his deeds. They also liked his way of living, both in the present and in the past. Glenn Tipton is still a vital member of Judas Priest, even though he doesn't perform every night. Despite having Parkinson's illness, he has been playing with the band in recent years. Through his songs, he maintains the spirit he has developed over more than 40 years. In 2024, Judas Priest released her album Invincible Shield. Despite being unable to play on a regular basis, Glenn continued to contribute to songwriting and record guitar parts, demonstrating that his metal spirit had not diminished despite his health. Even though he was no longer leading Judas Priest on stage, his iconic mark could still be heard in every note and melody, giving him an enduring legend. Glenn still unexpectedly attends Judas Priest events despite being unable to go on full tours anymore. It is always a memorable moment when he steps out onto the stage during the encore and plays Metal Gods or Breaking the Law with the band. Every time he appears, the audience erupts. They know they're seeing a sign of power, not just for the spectacle. Heavy metal's unyielding spirit. Glenn Tipton's unwavering efforts to raise awareness of and assist those with Parkinson's disease have had a lasting influence. The Glenn Tipton Parkinson's Foundation remains committed to funding research and providing support to those with Parkinson's disease worldwide. Music isn't the only aspect of his journey. Millions of people who are facing their own hardships now look up to him as an example of how the human spirit can overcome any obstacle. But Glenn Tipton's greatest influence goes beyond his work with Judas Priest and Parkinson's patients. It's how he altered the expectations for heavy metal musicians. He was more than just a talented vocalist throughout his life. He was a true musical constructor with tremendous ideas. His riffs influenced and were played by numerous guitarists, including Dimebag Darrell. Among the bands that performed together are Alter Bridge, Zakk Wylde, Mark Tremont, Panta, and Avenged Sevenfold. In addition to being one of the greatest heavy metal musicians of all time, Glenn Tipton is a shining example of perseverance in the face of adversity, having worked tirelessly with Judas Priest for more than 50 years. Parkinson's slowed him down, but it never put out the flame he ignited in the world of rock music. Heavy metal will always be associated with Glenn Tipton. Judas Priest left behind more than simply music, regardless of how long they remain together or how much the genre evolves. He demonstrates that rock and roll is about having spirit, strength, and an unwavering drive in addition to speed and talent. Are there any memorable moments you shared with Glenn Tipton? What most appeals to you about him? Please share your thoughts in the space provided below. If you appreciate Glenn Tipton and his work, kindly like and subscribe to the channel. This will enable us to continue examining rock and roll heroes' lives. Additionally, remember to tell your friends about this film. Let's ensure that Glenn Tipton's music and spirit are never forgotten by heavy metal fans.